comes from very clear expectations right from the beginning. So it's building a team that can actually withstand the pressure that is going to exist internally and being, I think, super honest about what that looks like. At Engine, we had the tagline of like, we're not for everyone, but we might be for you, because some people love those hypergrowth, myself included, of like, I want to see how fast I can run. And then the next day wake up and see if I can is there any more juice in there to squeeze? I don't believe in work-life balance. I'm a work-life integration. We have one life, most of us work, and that's the beginning and end of it. Internal champions are huge. I love investing in talent that is willing to get on some sort of crazy bus with me and try to do things that, like, at first glance are like, oh, that's not possible. We are not a family. We are a sports team. And
so good.
Your line can drop, you can get benched, the coach can change, you can get cut. They're going to bring in new skaters that are better than you, and because we're all here to win.
Ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for listening or watching another episode of the Leaders in Talent podcast. My name is Adriaan Kolff, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Matchr and the host of the Leaders in Talent podcast. And today my guest is Laura Stapleton. Laura is a seasoned talent executive with over 15 years of experience leading people and talent functions in high-growth tech environments like Bullhorn, Litmus, Mirakl, and Engine. Laura is known for designing and executing innovative, scalable strategies that fuel high-performance cultures and drive business results. But the real reason why I invited Laura on this podcast is that I've seen firsthand how Laura thrives in these high-growth organizations through our work together at Engine. And I really want to get under the hood, Laura, on how you are successful in these super fast-growing and ever-changing environments. So Laura, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, and am really looking forward to this conversation with you today.
Great. So Laura, let's dive in and let's give our listeners a little bit more context, right? Bullhorn, Litmus, Mirakl, and Engine. Like, what are we talking about in terms of fast-growing environments? Give us some numbers in terms of the skill that you've seen at these different type of organizations.
Sure. I think, the bulk of my experience when I think about high growth has really been joining organizations, mainly in the SaaS space, that are looking to double, even triple in size over a very short period of time. So my recent experience at Engine, I think, is a great example of that. Joining about 3 years ago, the company's under 400 people at that point in time and is 1,000 employees by the end of July 2025, right? So really fast in terms of the growth. And that growth can look different.
Are you facing market volatility, need to hire quickly, or have a team that sits idle? Meet Matchr, your flexible recruitment and sourcing partner. Scale your recruitment capacity up or down without compromising on quality. Trusted by Booking.com, Miro, Heineken, Grammarly, and Deal, Matchr is the RPO disruptor making waves in Europe and the US. For scale-ups and corporates, Matchr covers engineering, go-to-market, and G&A roles. Visit Matchr.io to see how we can support you. That's MATCHR.io.
Litmus was sort of a similar story in getting from 75 employees to 250 employees, right? And I think those foundational elements remain the same regardless of what stage that growth is at.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, that's very good context. Tell me a little bit more in terms of, stepping into a role of a VP of talent at a company like Engine, 400 with the ambition to double. Like, what is your mindset going into that role, and what are maybe some of the frameworks or things that you look at and prepare yourself going into those type of roles?
Yeah, I think it's preparing yourself with stabilizing what really matters the most with some of those foundational elements of talent that I think are, the consistent building blocks that translate from organization to organization, regardless of, industry. But then also being prepared to listen and to shift. Like, what are the problems that the key stakeholders, mainly the C-suite, what is the CEO trying to solve? Like, what is keeping them up at night? And really making sure that I understand the core root of those problems so that I'm not reacting. So I think it's that combination of addressing what is most important to them, but stabilizing what I know from my experience as a talent leader, those elements that have to be there right from the beginning.
So tell me a little bit more about that, right? Because what I found fascinating, and it's something that you and I talked about as well, during our corporation, is that dynamic between you and a founder / CEO that might have realistic, but also often maybe unrealistic expectations in terms of the growth of the business, what you need to hire. Like, how do you do that in your role? Managing those expectations.
Yeah, I think it's understanding where the expectations are coming from, right? So it's making sure that, like, sometimes there is alignment, or sometimes I think, oh, wait, we could be shooting higher than that, right? It really depends on the starting point. I mean, that's kind of mostly the expectations are super high, right? If you're going into a hyper growth organization. So it's really understanding, like, what's the problem to be solved? I'm a big believer in jobs to be done. What is the job to be done? And then kind of working my way back to make sure that I'm actually solving the right problem, right? Because I think sometimes we've seen, it's headcount, we have to hire and we need them in today, but it's really understanding, like, okay, well, why, right? If I know that there's like a time to fill constraint or a capacity constraint, it's really understanding, like, is this an issue that has to do with a product that we're trying to get off the ground? Is there pressure coming in externally from the board or something like that that's really causing the unrealistic expectations? And then I think it's also understanding, like, the trade-offs, right? Because I am a big believer of, like, how do I get to a yes with any request that's coming from a founder, CEO, or really anybody, any stakeholder or partner that I'm working with. It's like, how do we get to a yes? So it's understanding, are we solving the right problem? And then what are the trade-offs? Because I don't want to make some sort of assumption or response based on any type of limitations that I may or may not have, right? For me, like, well, what would I need to get this done? Even if my first take is that it's unrealistic, I'm going to always lead with, I'm going to assume that I could do it, and then just be really honest with what I would need and what are the trade-offs, and does this actually need to be done, right? If I'm asking for a lot, because I think there's a lot to unpack in those types of situations, but really fun relationships to walk into with those founder CEOs.
So tell me about a time. Give me an example of a time when you work with very unrealistic expectations, and how you were able to navigate of usually pretty strong-headed founders versus what's realistic, and how. Tell me about an example and how you worked around that situation.
Yeah, I think it's a concrete example of that, I would say hiring is always pretty clear in terms of expectations. So it could be around, compensation. Let's say we want something in a really highly desired space, whether that's like engineering or product, right? We see this a lot. And then you'll have that perception of, okay, we need people that have come from like FANG backgrounds, but then our comp is totally misaligned. Or somebody in the position. So it kind of comes down to like understanding the why. And I've always solved that by like, I'll get the candidate in front of you, right? And I'm going to show you the price tag that comes with that, if that is in fact the challenge that we want to face. But sometimes even too with those candidates, I think it's really creating that well-rounded picture, because a lot of the time, if there's an unrealistic expectation as it relates to talent, there's usually a lack of context or a lack of data, right? This person clearly doesn't have the full story if I'm sensing misalignment. So I have to give them the full story with actual proof. And so it is sort of showing that like, hey, maybe that background doesn't even work here because those businesses are structured completely different than how we're structured, or they're resourced very differently than how we are resourced. So it's actually, I think, putting both options in front, right? It always comes down to me of options. If I am meeting something like that with just disagreement, like that's going to show up as resistance. Where if I come back with optionality, like now this is showing up as partnership of like, I'm not telling you no, or I can't do this. I'm telling you, hey, here's exactly what you're asking for. Kind of goes back to what I just said. Here are all those trade-offs. Here's option B, which I think is really intriguing for X, Y reason. And sometimes there's, got to be a third door as well in that mix. But I think it's always creating optionality and that whole mindset of like, let me get to a yes, but also make sure that you have all the context and data, because the yes could be different than what you originally thought that it was going to be, but we reach it in a place that is like fully aligned. And, it's always operating with the best interest of the business, right? And coming from that place, I think has really helped navigate in some of those talent specific, but I think it bleeds into really any of those challenges that I've come up against.
And how do you do that with your team, right? Because you have, on the one hand, you have the C-suite, right? Like, especially high growth environments, nobody has time. Then your team's on a lot of pressure to deliver. How do you balance those kind of like expectation from the C-suite versus what's realistic of you requesting from your team? Like, tell me about that dynamic then on how you translate this back to your team.
Yeah, I think it comes from very clear expectations right from the beginning. So it's building a team that can actually withstand the pressure that is going to exist internally and being, I think, super honest about what that looks like. And this really comes down to, I think, not only the talent team or a people team, but any department in the organization, which is why I think things like really strong employee value proposition, really strong, whether that's culture memo, values, DNA, however you want to frame it, is really critical. And I think being super unapologetic about the reality of the environment that you're in.
Tell me a little bit more. Give me the juicy details. What does that look like, right? Because I know it's not for everyone.
Right. No, it's not for everyone. And, at Engine, we had the tagline of like, we're not for everyone, but we might be for you, because some people love those hypergrowth, myself included, of like, I want to see how fast I can run. And then the next day wake up and see if I can is there any more juice in there to squeeze? And I think a lot of people are, programmed like that, which is great. But there are other people that is not for them. And so like the last thing I would ever want to do is sugarcoat the reality of a situation, even if it's not our ideal state. If we're like, hey, this is how we're operating right now. This is not how we're going to operate forever, but it's like this today. And I need to know that you can be comfortable in that type of environment today versus like I'm sugarcoating for what I think future state will be or what I think you're going to digest better. And then you start and you're like, wait, this does not work for my life, right? I don't believe in work-life balance. I'm a work-life integration. We have one life, most of us work, and that's the beginning and end of it. And so it's like, it's gotta work. And so if we pretend like it's something that it's not, and then it doesn't work, I'm looking at attrition before, the person's even gotten through the door.
Yeah. Is this something that you learned over time, or is this something that you've started to do right from the get-go?
Yeah, I've definitely learned it over time through my own experiences. I really like people to shoot me super straight. I'm a mom of 3. So as a working mom myself, right, I want to run fast, and that incorporates a lot of different things. And I'm going to sign up for the challenging task. I couldn't begin to tell you how many hours a week I work. I joke that I work and work is also my hobby. But I like to know, like, I want to know exactly what I'm signing up for so that I can then choose, like, how am I managing the rest of it to make sure that my life is structured in a way that's going to position me and my family to be successful. And success looks like a lot of different things for different people. So I think it's like learning, you just never want to be surprised. And what I loved about it is, sometimes the organization, like they're going to tell you it's fast. It's going to feel faster, than even how you're internalizing it in most situations. And so, but being able to mentally prepare for that, I think is great versus the opposite of, you get in there like, oh, this is not what I thought that it was going to be. Or on the flip side of that, some organizations, if you're coming from an environment that's really fast and they're telling you like, hey, we need this business to run faster, which is why you're joining. It's not running that fast today. That also is very helpful to know so that you can get your arms around like, okay, this pace is going to feel different. And I have to like manage my expectations and make sure that I show up in a way that's going to drive that change, but also be digestible by the organization that is already in place today. So I think just like managing expectations is so critical. And it really sets that foundation of trust within the organization that allows for, for that space to fail fast, try new things, all the things that most companies are talking about. But if you feel like you're led right off the rip, like it's really hard to establish that trust later.
And how do you build that performance culture into your team, right? How do you get people really to pick up the speed as something that they might not have even deemed possible? Like, what are some of the things that you help and cultivate within your teams?
Yeah, it starts with like defining what that even means.
Yeah.
Like, what is fast, right? What do I think fast is? And is that different from what you think fast is? What are the clear expectations? And I think these come down to like those foundational elements that are so important to establish while you're trying to solve all the problems of the day. because if the team's unclear on their goals, like if, that's saying if you can't measure it, you can't improve it, right? You're missing the mark there in and of itself. So making sure that the expectations are super clear, that we know what fast is. And if we're trying to solve for, everybody wants their hire yesterday, like we all know that yesterday is not possible, but what is possible? And that's looking at like where in the process can we tighten things up so that we move that much faster. If it's like a time to fill, for example, you're looking at like time and stage or responsiveness, or how do we kind of manage those things? So I think it's being super clear on what fast looks like, having the data accessible to them, because if that team is not looking at the data on a daily basis themselves, like they're not going to be in the mind space of, am I actually getting better? Because it probably like feels faster. I feel like I'm working hard. Like I can feel like anything, right? Yeah. But what is the reality of how this is shaking out in their daily rituals and best practices? And then how is that translating into results? And I think it's also showing like internal champions are huge. I love investing in talent that is willing to get on some sort of crazy bus with me and try to do things that like at first glance are like, oh, that's not possible. And then it's sharing the results. And sometimes the results are like, yeah, it wasn't, right? Like we haven't figured it out yet. And we're continuing to like iterate and stretch and push. But then if you're showing like, no, you can get that profile that we never thought we'd land, and you can fill XYZ role in under 30 days. We had this mentality, and this is a recent example of, well, it takes 60 days to fill like a director role, which I would have told you last year that was not possible. And then it's like 60 days. And I'm like, well, wait, we can do that in a way shorter time frame. And then you have that example of like, oh, wow, here's a director level role that was filled in 30 days. And it's making sure that everybody is aware of that, because now they have the proof, right? It comes back to that, the facts of like, if this person can do it, we have seen that it is possible. And then it's like breaking it down, like step by step, like what made that possible and how do we create that consistency in terms of workflow that is going to make that outcome more likely in our other use cases across the board.
Hey, and is that something that you constantly, push your team on in terms of, it's like, hey, where can we do 1% more, right? Like it's the famous example of the British cycling team that said, every day we're going to improve 1%, right? But 1%, if you stack 1% up, you're going to be exponentially growing by the end of the year, right? Is that something that you are constantly looking at with your team in terms of where can we do a little bit more? Like where can we go faster? Is that the type of mentality that comes into play?
It does. I would say I still, and I don't know if this is right or wrong, like I give the big audacious goal. I give like, well, what if the percentage was this, right? Yeah. Like, wouldn't that be amazing? Like I kind of I am like a sort of vision thinker of like, what would that future look like? And then from there, it's like, what can we do to get closer to that reality? So I think it's a combination of the two, because that sometimes it can be like, if it's, such like a jarring transition from the reality of where we're at today, but really show them that like, we can move with like a realistic level of effort from where we're at to where we want to be through like, whether that's that 1% better every day, but sometimes 1% is not enough and I need more percentages faster.
I love this so much, Laura. I love this so much. I love that. You're like 1%. What are you talking about, Adriaan? Like we need to get 100% better.
We want to get there now. But no, and it's like, and you've got to drive that culture and have enough positive reinforcement too. I think that is really important, of making sure that the team feels valued, right? Because like they have to wake up with that, I think like they have to be intrinsically motivated to operate in a way that is going to, deliver the results, but also feel that sense of team environment, appreciation, partnership with me. And like, they're on the journey too. Like, it's really asking them like, what would this look like? Like, how do you think we could approach this, versus me coming in saying like, do this, and this, like they'd be like, why would I do that? So it's really making sure that it's a collaborative process that we go through together as a team. And I also have to be willing to think about things differently, to hear them out if they feel like something that I'm asking for is completely unrealistic, but then solution together. And I have them the same way that I would manage up, is like, give me some options. Like, what do you think is possible? How are you thinking about this? And if the reality is we have to run at this, like we're going to do it together. And what should that look like? And so creating this like space for co-creation of solutions, I really think helps drive engagement and allows for people to really operate at that higher level, at that fast pace consistently over time.
Hey, you said something interesting, right? So you say it's like, I set these big, hairy, audacious goals, right? Tell me a little bit more about that. What does that look like?
I mean, it can look like capacity increases is definitely a big one for us. So if we're going to try to say like, hey, we want to double recruiter productivity over the course of a year, that could be one. Or we want, 80% of the candidates that we send to a hiring manager, we want the hiring manager to be enthusiastically moving them forward. So those are like examples of like real goals that I have put in place in the past. And then working through, like if the recruiter, and I'll get great pushback on them. Like the hiring manager one drove so many great conversations about like, well, wait a second, like why do you want that law? Right. They challenged me, right? Of like, why do I want that? Why would I think that's good? And then we kind of have a back and forth and we run at it, but also create the space for what they believe is in the best interest of the business, the role, the stakeholder, so on and so forth. So,
all right, tell me about a time or like about an example where you set this audacious goal, right? Where you were almost like, I don't know if this is realistic, but let's just run with it, right? And you've done it. You've teamed some individuals surprise you. It's like, because you put the bar so high or so much further, people didn't think they were able to do it, but then, surprise themselves because you just put the bar so far ahead that they were just going for it.
Yeah, I mean, the recruiter capacity is definitely one of the capacity of the team was not aligned to the hiring plan that we had, right? So it's like the goals of the team were going to have to increase. And it was really showing them the team size wasn't going to increase because I think especially too with where AI and automation and all of that is going. And then also like partnerships like the one that we have, it's like, how can I tackle this hiring plan without telling the business that I need to double the size of my team? And a lot of it is like, where can I increase recruiter productivity? So that I think, it was challenging because I'm saying like, hey, your goals are going up. And that is always an interesting conversation to have with people. Like we're now expecting and need more of you and from you. But with that, what was amazing is I think TA runs a lot like a sales organization. So in this particular instance, we were operating with like a commission structure in place as an incentive. And so it was really tailoring that the same way that I would go-to-market commission, where there were accelerators on it. Like, I'm asking you this, but like, you're going to get comped for it if you can hit some of these accelerators. And we had team members hit 200% of their target. So like, not only did I raise the targets, but then we had people smashing the target. And not everybody, to be clear. It's one of those things of like, if you've got that plan, you can easily be like, we're doubling it. Like they were the wrong targets to begin with. And sometimes that happens, right? Especially when you're new to putting these targets in place, it's figuring out what does good look like. But it was really interesting because then it came back to that promotion of, telling the rest of the team like, hey, we had, out of a team of 20, 3 people absolutely crushed their goals and like they hit these accelerators, and the team, they all have the same comp plan, so they know what the accelerators look like. And that is very motivating to others because, there are a lot of talent teams are made up of very highly competitive individuals, and they want to not only, succeed financially, but people just like, they want to win, like they're there to win. And I think that, in that example, we were then able to really look at, okay, what actually made this possible? Is this consistent, right? Because then I couldn't go back and be like, okay, everyone's doubled because these 3 people did it. So it's like, you have to then have enough data points over an extended period of time to say like, wait, now I can formally shift this, but I can start forecasting to the business saying like, okay, here are the goals, but like, here is where I'm seeing overachievement, and manage expectations so that I'm not, undershooting. Like I really want to be aligned with like the business that, we're going to go for it as a team. But also be realistic with like, here's where I think based on this hiring plan, here's where I need agency spend, here's where I need an embedded model, here's resourcing that I need for tools and technology to make it possible to increase the productivity. So again, kind of anchoring back to like the trade-offs and like, we can tackle this, here's what it's going to look like in practice. And that overall has been like a really successful approach.
And for you, is this something that always came innately with you in terms of the drive, the competitiveness, and like the hunger? Or is this something that, you've learned from other leaders that you worked for previously in terms of, that push and that competitive edge?
Yeah, I think I'm a pretty competitive person by nature. It's actually funny. I kind of tie it back to even like my parenting, like with my kids. I think it shows up more there than it did for me. I was never like super athletic or have any like special talents like that I think allowed me to drive my competitive edge. And so it was really when I started working that I was like, oh, this is my sport.
Yeah.
Like, here we go. And so I always kind of operated with that mentality of like, this is something that I can have huge impact and, lead others. And this is where I have found a team environment. And but I model sort of how I operate with how, the sports teams. I'm a hockey mom, and like what that shows up in hockey. And I'll talk a lot about that in terms of saying like, I'm a big believer in like, we are not a family. We are a sports team. And
so good. Yeah.
Your line can drop, you can get benched, the coach can change, you can get cut. They're going to bring in new skaters that are better than you. And like, because we're all here to win. And so like, that is really at the end of the day. And I think that sort of frame up has really sort of like helped my team because they, I bring my whole self to work and encourage everybody else to do the same of like, oh yeah, like that makes sense. Like you want to be on the team. We're on this team because we want to win. And here's what winning looks like. And like that, I think encourages people to show up as
I love that.
Themselves. Yeah.
I love that. Is that how you start? Is that how you start the year, the quarter, or like, this is how we're going, this is what we're doing as a team in order to like set that kind of, purpose expectation to rally the troops?
This is what we're doing as a business. It starts with like, what are we doing? Like, what are the goals of the organization and making sure that the team understands how the business works.
Yep.
Like, how do we make money? What are we doing from a revenue perspective? Like, what are we doing from a product perspective? And so I think it's really anchoring them around that overall mission. And then I love OKR frameworks because it's really easy to then structure how our work supports those broader goals. So that's really how I like to start. And I think, getting the team rallied is something that's super important and doing that regularly. So even like quarterly, I don't think it's enough. Like we're making sure that the team has visibility into what is being talked about in leadership meetings, at board meetings, like what are the concerns? What are we all trying to do? That context is just worth so much. And it's really necessary to pull people out of their day-to-day, especially in hybrid or remote environments, to make sure that like people we all choose to like log in every day, right? And we all choose how we're going to show up. And so it's making sure that they feel that connection and that level of motivation so that like they choose to log in and show up and get it done in a way that's necessary for them to be successful. So I think establishing that connection at least monthly, I think is super important. But in team meetings, as often as you can create visibility, I think that makes all the difference for people.
What kind of rituals or kind of like team moments do you have to celebrate that, or like to get also like celebrate those little moments, of good candidates, or we've finally got our first offering? Do you have any of those rituals?
Yeah, I think it's funny because it's going to sound like such a small thing, but like a Slack channel that is titled TA Wins. And so it's instant, like and it's the recruiter, anytime a hire is made, is posting, so such and such hired this job. And then they'll actually post the source. And that was because we really care about the source, whether we're trying to like, drive more inbound candidates or whatever it might be. And all of leadership is also in the channel. So it's not just TA. So it's like the executive team is in there, and the executive team is very highly engaged in that channel. So people like often that channel is blowing up all the time, which is amazing to see. And it's even kind of highlighting like when people are going above and beyond. Like I can remember there was one, it was a Friday evening, and there were like 3 offers that came through, and we're all calling it's like Friday Night Lights, and everyone's so excited. And these are people like they're choosing on their Friday night to get these offers in. And so it's like that, it just like, it creates so much buzz, and it's really fun to watch. And I think the engagement from the rest of the business is really important, because like I can tell you that you're great until I'm blue in the face, but like your stakeholders have to be showing their appreciation, right? Like they're not necessarily hiring for roles on my team. And so I think that kind of goes back to that connectedness. So the TA Win Slack channel, I think, is huge. Having a weekly meeting that's more of like a scoreboard meeting than a wins. Like hopefully there are wins, but we've got to be comfortable talking about the losses too. And we have to create the space in which we can drive those conversations. I think that's really important. So like getting engagement across the business, celebrating in real time. And then of course, having those moments too, like when someone gets their first hire, or if someone gets their first, hire at a different level that was above and beyond if we gave them like a stretch assignment, or if there was like a massive rollout in terms of project-based work, or, now that AI is in the mix, like someone's really nailing it with some of the AI functionality that we've layered in, like making sure that we're creating that visibility. Because it feels good, right? Like it feels good when I have it. It's like, you sort of never, I think, progress out of that. And so it's making sure that like we do have that recognition, because it's really hard, right? And I think we need to have it to make the difficult moments, sustainable.
You mentioned AI, a couple of AI layers. Everyone's talking about it, right? I almost didn't want to go there, but now that you mention it, is there anything that you can share or willing to share in terms of what are some of the things that you've done that just from a very pragmatic, practical point of view?
Yeah, sure. Some of the ones, I think I've sort of hit on a lot of what now feels like the obvious, like with like note taking. So automating the note taking, we partnered with MetaView on that, which has been super successful for us, and like that functionality. And I think too, it's like what's I think tricky as a leader is you don't want to end up with this like Frankenstein like onslaught of AI solutions. So for us, it's been really leaning in on a few, and then for like inbound candidates, because that obviously is a huge time saver of not having to like review all of the resumes. So we partnered with Covey, which has been also a great partnership in making sure that like of all the applicants, we're only really paying attention to the 10% that are aligned with exactly what we're looking for, and that like those two partnerships, in my experience, have been really successful. And then I think it's just like staying on top of like, obviously, using whatever tools are available to you, whether that's like ChatGPT and things like that. There's just so much that can be done now and automated. So it's leaning in on that, but paying very close attention to like where it's headed. And I think just getting really clear on like the sort of stages of AI as we introduce them, making sure that it's digestible for the team, for the business. But yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes. And, we're piloting some new things that I think are super interesting. So, more to come on the AI.
Yeah, more to come. In terms of your own career, right? You've seen a variety of different companies. Now looking back, right, where you are now in terms of your career and what you've seen, the growth, etc. Like, what are some of the key lessons that you would tell your younger self, having been in these type of environments, when you just started in recruitment?
Oh gosh, like just hang in there, right? No, I think I would tell myself to focus on the operational excellence first. Like as a competitive results oriented person, it's really easy, especially when you've got like that great CEO founder relationship, to be like, all right, I'm just going to start to run. But then it's like, you look down and like your shoes are untied like that, you trip, right? And so I think it's really focusing on operational excellence first. I would put in, if I were building a team from scratch, ops functions first. Like honestly, I feel like I would hire a TA ops person before I hired a recruiter.
Wow. Okay. So tell me, let's go a little bit more in detail. I love this. This is such a nugget. So tell me a little bit more. Let's pretend, right? You're building a team from scratch. Why TA ops first? And what are the things that you want to have in place, tying the laces before you start running?
Totally. Because if there's no TA team in place, this means that I have a variety of stakeholders that think that they know everything there is to know about hiring, recruiting, however they think it should be done. And there's probably some good in there, but there's definitely inconsistency. There's definitely lack of best practices. And there's just a lot of context and knowledge that does not exist. And so I think with ops, it's like somebody has to run around and figure out like what the heck is the state of the state. And so like, I think the vision would be to have an ops person come in, do like an audit of what is happening, and then like, how are we going to fix this, right? So I think if you can really lock in those best practices, because all of that work still has to be done. And so like adding a recruiter into the mix, I think solves some of it, but then they get dragged into recruiting. So the impact from an operational excellence perspective is going to be really limited depending on like which teams have open roles and what roles are high priority and what's out to agency and what's in-house and, where ops, it's like, we're really going to focus on how to do this well. So it's, bringing in an ops person that has very solid experience and that can align on a vision in terms of like, this is how, this is what this is going to look like, knowing that we'll iterate, right? Because every team is different and you need to iterate based on the organizations that you're in, but really get that, like those strong foundational elements right from the beginning. And then you can scale the TA team to however big it's going to be or whatever bots or, who knows what it ends up looking like in the future. But I think that having that locked in is going to be so important for any organization.
So good. What are some of the key data points and metrics that you track?
Oh, geez. There's a laundry list, but I would say metrics that matter. Obviously,
I know exactly, because that's often what I see is that people measure metrics for the sake of metrics, but then you go into like, but why are you tracking as well? It's like, it's kind of like vanity metrics, right?
Right. No, totally. I mean, there's so many metrics that you could look at. I think hiring plan attainment is obviously the biggest one. Like, again, going back to what are we here to do and are we doing it or are we not doing it? That one is the most black and white for me. And then time to fill, right? So it's not only hiring plan attainment, but it's time to fill. And so I would say like measuring the number of P0 roles that I have open at any given time. And P0 roles I typically define as like anything that's been open for more than 45 days, anything that is director and above, and just sort of sentiment from the business, like what are our high priorities? And then getting really clear on like ending a quarter, we only want X percentage of P0 roles to be open. So making sure that we're really tackling them with the focus that they deserve. That's really important. The time to fill is obviously a big one because that just matters in terms of forecasting and being able to predict to the business, to myself, to the team, like, can we hit this hiring plan based on the state of the state? And then looking at like the funnel conversions, because that, again, it's going to come back to helping us understand like from the top of funnel, what needs to happen in order for the hires to become a reality. And then we can start improving it. Like, even if it's ugly, I want to see it. Like, I want to know how many do I need in TA screen today to get to that hire, even if I don't like the numbers. I need to know what they are. And then we start working towards like, what does great look like? And then like, what does 5% a day better look like?
Yeah. Love it. Laura, honestly, your energy is contagious. Like, I feel that we can talk much longer. But I want to wrap it up here, Laura. This was such a pleasure speaking to you. And also working together with you. I'm so happy that you got some time in your diary to have this conversation with me. What's the best way for people to connect with you? Is it, I assume, LinkedIn?
Yeah, no, LinkedIn would be great. And I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation as well. And our partnership, it's such a pleasure working with you. And I knew this was going to be a conversation that I would thoroughly enjoy. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura.